welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History. You probably know this by now, I'm sure you've been with me a while already, but if you don't know me, I'm Claire Ridgway. I founded the Anne Boleyn Files website and also the Tudor Society, and I've written a few books on Tudor history as well. But that's enough about me, let's get on to Tudor history. On this day in Tudor history, the 6th of June 1522, so we're in the reign of King Henry VIII, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and King Henry VIII, with all their companies, set off from Greenwich Palace and marched towards London to make what would be a grand entry into the city. Now, Emperor Charles V had landed on English soil at Dover on the 26th of May 1522. The purpose of his visit being to make an alliance with Henry VIII against Francis I, King of France. An alliance that would be the Treaty of Windsor. And one of the terms of that Treaty of Windsor would be the promise of a marriage between Charles and Mary, who was the 6-year-old daughter of Henry VIII and his wife Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon actually was Charles V's aunt, so there was a family connection there. Now, a 19th century writer has described Charles V's visit to England in 1522 as probably the most splendid royal visit ever paid to England. And I can agree with that, because there was certainly lots of pageantry involved in Charles's visit, all kinds of entertainment, including this huge, spectacular entry into London, which Chronicler Edward Hall gives a very detailed account of in his book. It happened on this day in 1522, and 9 pageants had been organised, and these are all described by Edward Hall, thankfully. I love it when we get these details. Hall writes of how a rich tent of cloth of gold had been put up a mile from St. George's Bar, and that this is where the two rulers, the Holy Roman Emperor and King Henry VIII, changed into coats of cloth of gold, and their companions into cloth of gold, tissue, silver, tinsel, and velvet of all colours, in preparation for their entry into the city. There the heralds arranged the retinues in order, pairing every Englishman with a visitor according to their degrees. So you know they were going in a procession with an English duke with a man of a similar status from the empire, from Charles V's retinue. So to mix them up and to have the empire and England sort of represented together. They then processed to Deptford, where they were greeted by the Mayor of London and the Aldermen, and an eloquent Latin oration greeted them, and that was done by Sir Thomas More. This oration praised the two rulers and the peace and love that was between them. At Southwark, the Emperor and King were received by the clergy, and then at Marshalsea and the King's Bench, the Emperor requested a pardon for a great number of prisoners, which the King granted. Now, that wasn't news to King Henry VIII, of course. That was all diplomacy. That had all been arranged, that the Emperor would ask for this pardon and the King would grant it. Now, the streets of the city of London that day were decorated with cloth of gold, silver velvet and arras, and the people could watch the procession of these two rulers and their retinues from behind railings in the streets. Now, I want to give you a brief rundown of the pageants in the streets of London that day, just so you can try and imagine just how spectacular this event was. And just a few days ago, I was telling you all about Anne Boleyn's coronation procession through the streets of London. And so you can kind of, get an idea of just how spectacular this event in 1522 was as well. Okay, the first pageant. At the drawbridge at London Bridge, which had been decorated with Emperor Charles's arms, there were giants, Hercules and Samson, holding a great tablet on which was written in gold letters the names of all of Emperor Charles V's lands and dominions. So I'm not quite sure how they've done these giants, but that does sound wonderful. The second pageant was in the middle of the bridge, and it was there was an imitation building which had towers, and a pageant of Jason holding the Golden Fleece. There was also a fiery dragon and fire-breathing bulls. That sounds wonderful too. I keep reading little bits and thinking, oh wow, that sounds wonderful. And then the next bit is even more amazing. As I said the other day, there are events that I would love to go back in time for, one being Anne Boleyn's coronation procession and her coronation, and also this, because it just sounds so amazing, and I just can't quite get my head around the organisation that would have been needed for all this, and the money as well. Number 3 pageant. This was at the Conduit at Gracechurch Street. It was a bastille with 2 great gates and 3 great towers. And this had been put together and built by the Hanseatic merchants. And there was a representation of the emperor sitting under a cloth of estate. And in a tower, there was a representation of the king. Charlemagne was depicted giving the sword of justice to the emperor and the sword of triumphant victory to Henry VIII. Before Charlemagne sat the Pope, to whom Charlemagne gave the crown of thorns and 3 nails. Number 4 pageant was found at Leadenhall, and this was organised and created by the Italian merchants. Here, in a goodly pageant, wonderful, curiously wrought, and that's a quote, not my own words, we have John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster and son of King Edward III, sitting on a root. And out of that root sprang many branches, and on each branch were images of kings, queens, or noble persons who descended from that Duke, John of Gaunt. And the tree culminated with images of Emperor Charles V, Henry VIII, and Catherine of Aragon. So it's talking about their descendancy from this Duke, this son of King Edward III. The 5th pageant, this was at the Conduit at Cornhill. There were gateways, arches and towers, all decorated with the arms and badges of the 2 rulers. The towers were full of musicians, and between them was a palace where the legendary King Arthur sat under a rich cloth of estate and was sitting at his round table with his knights of the round table as well. Pageant number 6 was at the Little Conduit at the Stocks. This was a pageant designed by author and printer John Rastall. It featured flowers, birds and beasts, and things of pleasure, plus water full of fish. And around it were the elements, the planets and the stars, and on top the Trinity and angels singing. The Trinity blessed the king and the emperor, and under his feet was written, "Behold, the lover of peace and concord." Pageant number 7, can you believe that there are more? At the Great Conduit in Cheapside, we have a pageant with 4 towers linked by galleries, all decorated with sumptuous fabrics like cloth of gold, and decorated with the arms and badges of the king and emperor. In the 4 towers were 4 fair ladies, symbolising the cardinal virtues. In the galleries sat children, men and women, all singing and playing instruments. pageant number 8 was found at the Standard in Cheapside, and it was described as being a huge timber building with towers, arches and pillars supported by monsters and decorated with the arms again of the 2 rulers. At the foot of this pageant sat King Alfonso of Spain, known as Alfonso the Wise, with a branch springing from his breast. Out of this branch sprang the many kings, queens and princes, who were all richly apparelled, and apparently this is a quote, everyone with a scutcheon of arms showing their marriages. So again, this sort of family tree. And on the highest branch sat the emperor and the king. The final pageant, pageant number 9, was found at the Little Conduit at Cheapside. It was a depiction of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, along with minstrels playing, angels singing and apostles saying verses in Latin. The pageant also featured St. George, St. John the Baptist and English saints including King Edmund, Edward the Confessor, Dunstan, Thomas Becket and Erkenwald, and also Henry VI, whose canonisation had not been completed at this point. At St. Paul's, King Henry VIII and Emperor Charles V were received by the Archbishop of Canterbury and 21 prelates. The 2 men made their offerings at the high altar there before riding to Blackfriars, where Emperor Charles V was lodged. Phew, what a day, and what an amazing sight for the citizens of London. Henry VIII went all out to impress Charles V, to show the Empire and England what the king was capable of organising, and his wealth, and that it must have been a huge thing to organise. And it's just reading about it, the pictures in my mind it's really, really hard to imagine just how lavish and spectacular these pageants were. And I would love it if somebody decided that they were going to reenact one of these pageants or one of these processions. It would be wonderful. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll be back again tomorrow, but for now you can give me a like, you can subscribe to the channel, you can hit the bell to be notified, and you can of course leave comments. I don't manage to read all of them, I'm afraid, but I really do appreciate your questions, your comments, your feedback. So have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.